Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marie Sullivan, and at this time, I would like to call to order the April 13, 2021 special meeting of the Maricopa County Community College District Governing Board. With that in mind, I will call roll of the board members at this time. Ms. Bittersmith?
I'm here.
Thank you. Mrs. McGrath?
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Narini?
I'm here.
Great. Ms. Smith? Thank you. Dr. Thor?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Wynn?
Present.
Thank you. And with my presence, the full complement of the board is here with 7-0. I'd like to remind everyone that we are live captioning our meeting. And so please look in the chat window of our Webex meeting where you will find a link. Please click on that link to open a web page with the live captioning. So today we're meeting in a special meeting rather than a traditional work session. So there's no need for a song today, Mr. Yaquinto. But with that, I want to comment that we are going to hear a fiscal year 21-22 budget update and strategic compensation plan. Then as we do that, we will have an opportunity for some dialogue as we would in a work session with the presenters. With that, Dr. Gonzalez, I'm going to turn to you to introduce further our topic and our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sullivan, members of the board, CEC, and guests this evening. Again, we come to you with our latest and greatest on a budget update and strategic compensation plan. It is a reflection of the many conversations that we've had over the course of the various work sessions, and it is also informed by data that has continued to be updated, since the last time that we've gotten together to talk about budget. So what you will see today is a reflection of updated data, things that we know today that we didn't know the last time that we were with you. It will also reflect some of the guidance that you provided as a board in our previous conversations. I think there's between 30 and 35 slides. There's quite a bit of information, and we probably will take full advantage of the amount of time that we've been given to have this discussion. So we look forward to a very rich discussion and further direction as we feel like we are approaching the home stretch of a budget process, and hopefully we can get this finalized as we're required to do in a legal manner. So with that, President Sullivan and members of the board, I will turn it over to Dr. Moore, Gary Yaquinto, and team to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, President Sullivan, board members, Chancellor Gonzalez, CEC members, colleagues, guests, and students. I'm Jim Moore. I'm the interim Chief Operating Officer for the district, and I would kind of like to frame today's presentation and work session in terms of the desired outcomes. As the board knows, this is our fourth presentation this year on the budget, and it's been a different process this year. Normally, the board's first look at this budget, I've been told in the past, is around this time of the year, and it's often doesn't give a lot of time for reflection and direction. And so I think this has been a great process this year. As we presented to the board, it's allowed for a lot of transparency throughout the district with input from leadership and employees and so forth. So this is going to be a group presentation with various members working on or presenting specific sections of it. What will markedly make this presentation different than our other budget presentations is the compensation proposal that is a part of the budget. I know the board's been waiting a long time and been asking for a compensation strategy and a compensation plan. Last fall, last semester, we presented a compensation philosophy. This is our our attempt to operationalize that philosophy, and it's pretty exciting. We've been working on it a long time, and there are it's very comprehensive, and it's a multi-year endeavor that will require, a lot of commitment of resources, I think, in the next few years. But it addresses many of what I think of as the systemic things that the district has struggled with. Principally among that, is a growing inflationary gap between our salary structure and the general economy. So, I would hope that as we go through this, we don't allow that particular piece of the plan to overshadow all of the elements that are in the compensation proposal. So it's going to address many things, and we'll let that unfold. I mean, everything from employees progressing through range to professional development to correcting some things in our pay structure that are lacking in terms of a career ladder. There's just a lot of exciting stuff in this proposal. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary to sort of start to address some of those assumptions that we've shifted slightly, as Dr. Gonzalez indicated, based on new and more accurate information. We've recast the budget a little bit, and our desired outcome, I guess, in the long term, is to take feedback from today's work session and come back to the board with a first reading of a budget for the 21-22 year, and then the following month, a second reading and adoption of the budget. So Gary, if you would, our CFO would lead off.
Be happy to, Jim, and thank you. Good afternoon, President Sullivan, members of the board, Chancellor Gonzalez, colleagues and guests. I'm Gary Yaquinto. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the district. And before we dive into the presentation, I do have a few remarks on the timing of remaining budget actions that we need to take in this final stretch, as the Chancellor indicated. First, Jim mentioned the first read, and our plan is to bring the proposed budget forward for first read this month. It'll be on agenda review on April 20th, and then for the regular board meeting on April 27th. We'll also publish the proposed legal and full budget on our website on May 5th. And having said that, we're also required to publish the legal budget and hearing schedule in the Arizona Republic. Our documents are due to the Republic for publication on May 6th, with publication 2 times on May 10th, a week apart, on May 10th and May 17th. And also the publication will include the truth and taxation notice that would be related to the secondary to primary tax rate shift. Then at the May 25th governing board meeting, you will have the budget for adoption prior to the deadline of June 6th. So today, as Jim mentioned, and the Chancellor mentioned, we're looking for the board's guidance on several key issues for the FY22 budget. First is compensation. The cost of living adjustment recommendation that we have made previously, including the retroactive recommendation for implementation back to January 1st of 2021. Next, we need guidance from you on continuing the secondary to primary tax shift for capital, and I will have a detailed presentation at the end of our presentation this afternoon. Next, we're also proposing a reduction of the budget cut that we had previously proposed at 3%. We are now proposing to back off of that level, and we're now proposing a 1% ongoing reduction in our overall budget. And we're able to dial back the budget cut for a couple reasons. The first being that while, as everybody knows, our tuition revenues have shrunk this year. And we're looking at, a 15% overall reduction in our tuition revenue. But what's happened is that the district and the colleges have more than made up for the losses through lower spending. And part of that is a result of the pandemic that has naturally produced some savings for us. And in addition, we have, and Kim Granillo will be addressing this, we have large amounts of federal monies, the CARES money, the CARISA money, and the most recent one, the American Rescue Plan money, which can provide us with, albeit they are one-time monies that must be spent in 2 years, but nevertheless, they provide us a bridge for our eventual recovery of enrollment from the disastrous year that we had this year. So Elsa, sticking with this slide, here's what our agenda is. First, I'll update changes in the budget outlook since January, which was our last presentation to you. Next, Kim Granillo, who is one of 2 district directors for our federal grant monies, will provide an update of the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, which consists of those 3 federal acts that I mentioned previously. Next, I'll talk and present to you proposed new expenditures for the FY22 budget, which includes the cost of living adjustment. And then Frank Wilson will present the strategic compensation plan that has been developed by the human resources team with input throughout the district and colleges. And then following that, I'll provide updates on propositions 301 and 207, revenues and expenditures. And then finally, we'll conclude with capital expenditures and funding. So Elsa, next slide, please. Okay, fiscal year 21-22 budget update, changes since January. And it's pretty good news. First, as I mentioned, our general fund balances have grown due to lower overall spending. And so we're several millions ahead of where we were last year at the end of fiscal year 21. I should say fiscal year 20. Next, we have increased our projected revenues from proposition 301 and 207. We've added an additional $1 million in each of those years, fiscal year 21 and 22, based on the very strong sales tax collections at the state level. Next, our actual and estimated allocations of federal grant monies is $333 million, which is, believe it or not, it's about 1/2 of our total general fund expenditures. And of that $330 million in federal grant monies, we have about 297, a little less than 300 million that remains to be spent. So the combination of the higher balance and the federal monies have provided, again, a short-term bridge. So while our enrollment climbs back and we heal from the disaster of this fiscal year, we can now lower that budget cut amount from 3% to 1%. We're being conservative in our projections of enrollment growth. We're building in 1% increase in fiscal year 22, and then 2% each year beginning in fiscal year 23 for the next several years. Again, it's conservative. We think it's going to be greater. We think there's going to be a rebound. But with our conservative projection, this would have the district regaining about 1/2 of the 15% decline in enrollment we experienced this fiscal year. And again, it's our hope that growth in enrollment will be stronger than what our initial projections have been built into the budget. We'll know more as we move through registration for next fall, and maybe updating those projections even more as we gain more information. And then finally, we have not changed our recommendation on compensation of a 4% cost of living adjustment that would be retroactive to January 1st, 2021. So with that as a description of the changes that have occurred that we've seen since our last presentation in January, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Granillo to address the federal grant monies. Kim?
Thank you, Gary. Next slide, please, Elsa. Thank you. Good afternoon, President Sullivan and members of the Governing Board. As Gary said, I'm Kim Granillo, and I'm the Associate Chief Financial Officer and Controller for Maricopa, and I'm here to share a brief update of the additional federal relief funding that has been awarded to our colleges, as well as anticipated funding as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. As shared in January, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRRSA, was approved by the federal government late in 2020, and allocations were provided by the U.S. Department of Education in mid-January of 21. Then in March, the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, was approved. All three relief bills are known by the U.S. Department of Higher Education as Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, or HEERF. All three allocations, CARES, CRRSA, and ARP, include buckets for direct grants to students and institutional type costs. CARES and CRRSA both provide additional funding for minority serving institutions, and it is expected that ARP will do the same. The American Rescue Plan allocations have not been disclosed yet, but are anticipated later this month. You'll see in a couple of slides what the anticipated allocations are for Maricopa. It is also anticipated that the guidelines for using the ARP funds will be the same as or similar to those for the CRRSA funding. The latter two acts, CRRSA and ARP, expand the allowable uses of the HEERF funds from the CARES Act awards, and some are listed on this slide. To highlight one in particular, as Gary was referencing previously, institutions are now allowed to use the HEERF funds to offset lost revenue, which for Maricopa would primarily be lost tuition related to enrollment declines. However, colleges could also consider addressing lost revenues for auxiliary activities such as food service and lost rental income. Maricopa leadership continues to evaluate options and strategize how best to use the funds to benefit students and ensure a stable Maricopa going forward. A couple of more comments. We have finally received confirmation that all awards under the HEERF umbrella apply to expenses and costs incurred back to March 13th of 2020. That had been a little bit contentious, as they had originally said March 13th and then came out with a December 27th date. But we have actually received confirmation that we can go all the way back to the original declaration of this emergency for the pandemic, which was March 13th. We also know that we have also received confirmation that the awards of the new allocations will restart the award period of 1 year. We also continue to anticipate the ability to apply for a 1-year no-cost extension, which would give us 2 years, also as referenced by Gary, to use the funds taking us into 2023. Next slide, please, Elsa. As shared previously, all three allocations are based on Pell population and enrollment, and the last two awards, both CRRSA and ARP, included a distance learning enrollment component too, which certainly benefits our system. As Gary referenced also, the total for Maricopa is $330 million, and again, that does include estimates for the ARP Act. Next slide, please, Elsa. This final slide for the HEERF funding is an overview of the allocations to Maricopa by college and by HEERF bucket, CARES, CRRSA, and ARP. I want to point out that the ARP awards are simulated, and they were provided by the American Council on Education based on their understanding from their contacts in Washington, D.C., and that the intent is to allocate the ARP funding in the same manner as the CRRSA funds were. The amount provided as part of the American Rescue Plan was about 74% higher than what was awarded to all of community colleges in CRRSA, so that is where they came up with their extrapolation of an approximate 74% increase in the awards to the institutions. Total allocations to the system are anticipated to be a little more than $330 million. To date, we have spent or encumbered nearly $33 million, leaving approximately $297 million remaining. In the Governing Board snapshot a couple of weeks ago, you would have received the additional tables that provided this data by student aid, institutional, and HSI allocations. This is just the summary table. This is what I have for you this afternoon, and I'll turn it back over to Gary to continue the budget presentation. Thank you.
And thank you, Kim. And Elsa, if we could move to the next slide, please. Fiscal year 21-22 general fund proposed new expenditures. We've built $27 million of new spending into the FY22 budget. It's comprised of $2.2 million of required expenditures that are outlined in the first section of this chart, and then $24 million related to compensation. In my next slide, we'll outline the funding sources for the compensation package. But before we leave this slide, finally, last year, the board approved $1 million for a comprehensive facilities plan, which is looking down the road over the next decade on how our facility needs will likely change and what might need to be done in the way of new investments to accommodate those changes. The colleges have asked, in addition to this comprehensive facilities plan, that an education component and an IT component be added to accompany the facilities piece. We think that this makes sense and have added an additional $800,000, which is one-time expenditure, to the budget proposal. So if Elsa, if we move to the next slide, please. And board members, you've seen most of this slide back in January, and it shows how we plan to fund the cost of living adjustment at 4% retroactive to January 21st. And our projections indicate an increasing general fund balance, which we think can be used to fund the cost of living adjustment for this year. That's the $10.1 million that you see in the FY 2021 column. And for FY 22, we propose to use a combination of new revenue, $10 million from new property taxes associated with new construction. And we also recommend budget transfers from the general fund to other funds for all but about $3.9 million of the total $24 million cost. We believe the additional $3.9 million, which will go toward market and equity adjustments, and Frank Wilson will discuss those further in his segment, can come from our enrollment increases and potentially from fund balances. What I've explained on compensation here this afternoon is just for the short term, covering really one budget cycle, as well as being retroactive to mid-year of this year. And the HR division, with Frank Wilson's assistance and guidance, along with Georgetta Kelly and her team, have developed a comprehensive long-term compensation plan. And so what I will do is now turn it over to Frank Wilson for that discussion. Frank?
Thank you, Gary. President Sullivan, members of the board, my name is Dr. Frank Wilson, and I'm the Interim District Director of Human Resources. And I'm excited to speak with you today regarding the Strategic Compensation Plan. In October of 2020, the Governing Board approved the compensation philosophy. And that philosophy acknowledges that pay, benefits, and professional development serve as a motivating drivers in attracting, preserving a highly talented and accomplished workforce. To achieve the philosophy, there are a number of goals that are identified, and they include the following. First, build and sustain an engaged and talented workforce through progressive career mobility programs. Second, be good and prudent stewards in the use and administration of public funds. Third, maintain a total compensation model that values and supports pillars of care, aligns with market trends, and recognizes innovative practices. Fourth, uphold fair and equitable pay practices. And fifth, value individual and organizational achievements in maintaining a high-performance culture. These goals have informed the work that we've done in regards to the strategic compensation plan, which is the strategy by which we will achieve these goals. Next slide, please. In terms of the strategic compensation plan design, we've employed external subject matter experts to help us identify areas for improvement and how to achieve the goals. This strategy includes two parts. The first part was the salary system market analysis. We have Mercer Group and Evergreen Solutions, are two different experts who have conducted reviews of our market. Mercer has focused on the staff salary system and structure, and Evergreen Solutions focused on the faculty structure. Part two is an independent review, and this is currently underway by Mercer Group. They are looking at all of our policies, practices, and procedures as related to compensation and classification. They're looking at how we pay our folks, how our folks advance through our structure, and they're bringing forward multiple recommendations related to how we can strengthen our structure such that we remain market competitive. So all of that input is feeding into our design of the strategic compensation plan. Additionally, we've identified a funding strategy by which we can maintain our compensation systems going forward. Next slide. So the findings from our salary system market analyses are that our salary structures are not aligned with market. In fact, our lack of consistent investment in our salary system maintenance for the past decade is one of the contributing factors why we are not presently aligned with market. So the output from those recommendations is that we make adjustments to how we pay our folks and the pay structures themselves to become market aligned. And again, as a part of our discussion, we're going to identify a funding strategy as well. Next slide. So Evergreen Solutions conducted the faculty market study in 2018 with the report coming out in early 2019. At that time, the faculty salary structure was about 5% behind the market. They did bring forward recommendations, which organizationally we did not act on at the time. So here in 2021, it's estimated we are about 8 to 10% behind market at this point in time. The Mercer Group is conducting the staff market salary study, and that is currently underway. But the analysis shows so far that the structure is about 7 to 10% behind the 50th percentile of the market, with some jobs being as much as 18% behind the market. And in terms of this study here, they benchmarked 109 positions representing 1,623 staff employees in terms of that market study. Next slide. You've seen this slide before in prior presentations, but we want to share it again to emphasize that the COLAs that we've provided in Maricopa have not kept pace with inflation, and so we've fallen behind. And so as you see on this graph, the annual COLAs are the red color, the cumulative COLA is blue, and then price increases are represented by green. And you can see we're about 9.31% behind in terms of keeping pace with price increases. Next slide. As we dug deeper to figure out why are we in that place, we looked at our historic investments in salary system maintenance. This is the amount of money we set aside to invest in steps and COLAs historically. And you see here over the first decade of this century, from fiscal 1 through fiscal 9, we were fairly consistent in our investment. Fiscal 10, we didn't invest anything. But over that decade, the average annual investment was about $10.91 million per year in terms of maintaining our salary systems. That dropped considerably in the next decade, down to $7.98 million. And you can see it became much more volatile, the investment. So some years we'd invest a lot, some years we wouldn't invest hardly anything. And as a result, we began to fall behind the market. This is even more obvious when we adjust the investment, everything to 2020 dollars. So we'll look at that in the next slide. So when we've adjusted these investments for inflation, we can see that the average investment over the first decade was about 14.18 million per year in maintaining our salary systems, and that dropped to 8.46 million per year over that next decade, a gap of about 6 million per year. We're going to see that that underinvestment is the leading factor causing us to be significantly behind market at this point in time. Next slide. So what do we do about it? Well, we're proposing a market alignment model, and the assumptions we're building into this model is that full-time employee salaries are 7% behind the market, and the market is moving by about 2.6% per year. We are committed to having our salary structures be aligned with the 50th percentile of the market so that we may remain market competitive and attract quality talent. Also, the gap between where we are and where the market is to be closed by fiscal year 26. So we're proposing beginning a market alignment model beginning in fiscal 22. Gary already presented to you that 4% salary increase that's been proposed. That is an integral part of this multi-year plan. To illustrate how this would play out, we're going to look at the 4,752 full-time employee salaries for both faculty and staff, which totaled 326.3 million as of fiscal or February 13th, 2021. That was the count. Next slide. This graphic shows where we are in terms of our investment, where the market is, and how we want to close the gap. So the red line at 326.3 million shows our current level of investment in employee salaries. This is salaries alone, doesn't include the benefits portion, simply salaries. If we do nothing, we will remain at the 326.3 million into the future as the market, which is designated by the blue line, will continue to move further and further away from where we're at. We'll become farther and farther behind. It'll be increasingly difficult for us to attract the talent we need to attract. So our strategy is to make progress over each of the next 5 years to close the gap between where we are and where the market is. And that will require a significant investment upfront over those next 5 years. And then once we attain market alignment in 2026, we'll be able to lower the investment and just focus on maintaining the system rather than a larger investment. Again, the large investment over these next 5 years is due to our underinvestment over the last decade, which allowed us to fall behind the market. Next slide. Here's a table illustrating the plan. So here in fiscal year 2021, we are at $326.3 million is what we're spending on annualized full-time salaries. As of this point in time, there's been no additional investment in our salary structure. The market is at 350.9 million. That is what we would need to be investing to be market aligned. For fiscal 22, you see the proposed 4% increase. That $13.1 million is what's required to cover the full-time employees. And as Gary shared earlier, the 20.1 million covers the full-time employees, the part-time employees, as well as all the associated benefits costs related with that. So we're looking here at an investment of about 4 to 4.13% per year over the next 5 years. And then once we've attained market alignment in 2026, we can drop back and just make adjustments to maintain the system to keep pace with the market, which is forecasted at about 2.6% per year. Additionally, beyond this level of spending for market alignment, we'll be looking at additional investments we can make into our structures to ensure that we're achieving the goals identified in the compensation philosophy. Next slide. So how do we fund this investment? Well, we can look at new revenues as one source to assist this in funding. And if we look at our historical property tax revenues, we observe that they've increased every year from fiscal year 2013 through 2020. And we can forecast what our future new revenues might be from property taxes. The conservative line of best fit forecast predicts annual growth of about 12 million per year. The increasing growth rate forecast predicts annual growth increasing from, say, 16.8 million per year in 2021 to as much as 30.1 million per year in 2026. And we will look at this graphically on the next slide. We propose using 58.7% of the new property tax revenues to fund salary system maintenance once market alignment is attained. Again, it's going to take additional resources up front because we're out of alignment with the market, but we're proposing that once we attain market alignment, 58.7% be set aside to maintain our system. This number comes from our history and how we were spending. So in fiscal 20, the personnel services account budget made up 58.7% of the forecasted revenue budget. And so that's where that percentage is coming from. Again, these figures do not include the benefits cost. These are focused just on the salaries alone. This idea of investing a portion of new revenues into maintaining your compensation system is not new. San Diego Community College System, they budget 85% of the new revenues for compensation adjustments. And once again, because we failed to maintain the salary system from fiscal 10 to 21, a larger investment is needed for fiscal 22 to 26 to close the market gap, and then we can move into maintenance mode. Next slide. So here you see the blue dots represent our property tax revenues, and then the red line is the line of best fit forecast. So that's forecasting an increase of about 12 million a year. The green line is reflective of the growth that we've seen from like 2017 to 2020. It's an increasing growth rate forecast. The reality is our revenue will likely fall somewhere between the red and the green lines. And that, of course, will yet to be seen as we move into the future. But that gives us an idea of what to forecast in terms of revenues. Next slide. We return again to look at our annual investment in compensation. And these are again in 2020 dollars, so adjusted for inflation. We see that over the next 5 years, we're proposing an increased investment, much more than we've been doing recently, to offset the lack of investment over the prior decade. But once we get up to the market, the system stabilizes. And so if you see there in fiscal 27 to fiscal 30, we're forecasting a need for about a little over $14 million per year to remain market aligned. That is similar to the level of investment that we did in the first decade of this century, where we're investing about 14.18 million per year. So we can stabilize the system. The challenge is we have to make up for our underinvestment over the last decade to get to that stabilization. Next slide. A second issue which we plan to address with our strategic compensation plan is addressing equity. In 2018, a new staff salary system was implemented, which included the salary structure as well as the classification structure, but there wasn't an appropriate review of existing staff salaries with needed adjustments. So an effort was made in 2019 to make some salary adjustments for staff earning less than 100% of the salary range midpoint, but there weren't sufficient funds to fully address that issue. So while some progress was made, issues remained. In 2021, there are currently 843 full-time regular staff earning less than 95% of the salary range midpoint. And so we're bringing forward a recommendation to adjust the salaries of these individuals to bring us closer to an alignment with the market. Next slide. This investment for these 823 employees is about $3.2 million, and this is part of that $3.9 million that Gary shared with us on the earlier slide for the investment for fiscal year 22. The average adjustment in terms of salary for these affected employees would be about $3,951. These figures presume the 4% salary adjustment for fiscal 22 is implemented. That's already been proposed. So these are adjustments that would be on top of that. And again, this is focused on addressing the equity issue in terms of how we value employees and their contribution. This targets those who are below the salary grade midpoint. Next slide. In addition to those adjustments for the full-time regular staff earning less than 90% of the salary grade midpoint, we've also targeted some other areas that need some attention. So within the administrative support job series, we know that we do not have enough levels in terms of positions, and we need to make some adjustments there. The proposed adjustments would affect those individuals who are providing administrative support to deans, VPs, presidents. And so we're looking to add another level in there and make some adjustments there. Also, we were looking at structural alignment on academic advisors. In terms of how we're dealing with academic advising at the colleges, there's different structures that are being used. And as our student affairs leaders are looking at that and adjustments that might need to be made, we're setting aside resources to help fund any salary adjustments that need to be made in light of those changes that they're looking at. Also, we know in terms of IT, that many of our IT jobs are significantly misaligned with the market, and we've been working closely with our colleagues in IT as well as with Mercer to identify the need for a new job series, job families, and jobs themselves. And we've set aside some resources to begin to address those issues, especially where we're significantly behind the market in some of those roles. So altogether, that's the 3.9 million for fiscal 22. Next slide. For fiscal 23, we're looking at some targeted adjustments. In that year is the plan to roll out a new faculty salary system. This strategy has been under development for a number of years. And so we were forecasting a need for just under $1 million for adjustments that will be needed to ensure fairness, consistency, and so forth as we transition folks to the new faculty salary system. Also in fiscal 23, on the staff side, we're looking to implement promotional advancements for support level 1 positions. These are our lowest level positions in the organization, support level 1. And what we're proposing is providing a way for these individuals at level 1 to organically progress to level 2. And so that by demonstrating their excellence and their contribution and mastery of the things they need to achieve level 2, to provide an opportunity for those folks to advance automatically without waiting for an institutional-wide salary adjustment. Next slide. For fiscal 24, we plan to implement the new staff classification and compensation system. This is the enhancements that Mercer is bringing forward as a recommendation. And so we wanted to give ourselves a couple of years to adequately plan and implement that system. And when we transition the staff to that system, those upgrades that have been made, we forecast the need of about 1.57 million for that implementation as we migrate folks to that new system and ensure that everyone's in the proper job family, job series, and job itself. We're also looking at implementing promotional advancements for professional level 1 positions. This is similar to what we proposed for the support level 1 positions in the prior year. This looks at our lowest level professional grade positions and provides a way for those individuals to advance to professional level 2. Additionally, in fiscal 24, we're proposing an enhanced anniversary awards. This celebrates our employees who have remained with the organization for long periods of time, and we celebrate when they hit key milestones with an anniversary award to move them forward and acknowledge their significant contribution. Next slide. For fiscal 25, we set aside resources for the ongoing maintenance to ensure that our compensation is fair, consistent, and that we have organizational functionality. We believe that setting aside resources each year for this purpose will help us ensure that we'll be able to maintain our salary system, keep it market aligned, and ensure that we're fair and consistent in terms of how we pay employees. Additionally, we'll continue into fiscal 25 with maintaining the enhanced anniversary awards. Next slide. And for fiscal 26, again, moving into maintenance mode, ensuring we have a fair, consistent, and organizationally functional system and structure, and continue to maintain that moving forward. We believe that this multi-year strategy will be central to us achieving the compensation philosophy goals. And we look forward to collaborating with you in the years ahead to make these improvements to the organization. Thank you. I'll go back to you, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Also, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, I have one last slide on the general fund. This is our sources and uses of funds summary. So if I can direct you to the third column, which is labeled fiscal year 22, and if you all go all the way down to the last row, you can see that our uncommitted fund balance in fiscal year at 6/30/2022 is projected at $48.7 million, which is quite healthy. And I'd also like to point out that the 48 million is reached with first setting aside that additional 6% of funds in reserve to achieve the total 16% primary set aside that we've been recommending, which equates to approximately 2 months worth of operating costs. And the FY22 general fund also includes the 1% overall budget reduction that I mentioned previously, which amounts to about $7.2 million, as well as the reallocations for funding the 4% cost of living adjustment, as well as the required expenditures of $2.2 million. Next slide, please, Elsa. Okay, Proposition 301. Proposition 301 provides, it was passed by the voters, provides a share of state sales taxes to Maricopa and other state community colleges for workforce development initiatives. Tax collections on taxable sales have been rising rather precipitously during the pandemic, believe it or not, largely from retail sales, including sales over the internet, which are taxed, and construction sales in some sectors such as tourism, hotels, motels, and restaurants are down, but they've been more than offset by the increase in retail sales and construction. So we've increased our projections of Proposition 301 in both fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. Previously, we were showing essentially no opportunity for additional investments in workforce development, but by adding the additional projected revenue after expenditures and investment commitments are accounted for, we expect to have little less than $2 million, $1.8 million available for new investments in workforce development out of Proposition 301 funds in fiscal year 22. Next slide, please. Okay, Proposition 207, and this is a big one. The newly voter-approved Proposition 207, that's the excise tax on sales of recreational marijuana, will generate significant revenues over time. This money is to be directed toward workforce development, job creation, and STEM programs. And based on our updated analysis, we have increased our projection of Proposition 207 revenues for fiscal year 22. We originally projected $9 million, but after additional analysis, we believe those sales are going to be stronger than we originally projected. So we believe that we could bring in as much as $16 million in fiscal year 22. And this would include the dump, for lack of a better term, of Prop 207 revenues that will occur on June 30th of this fiscal year, 2021, which we have rolled in. We can't spend it, obviously, if it drops on June 30th by the end of the fiscal year. So we've rolled that amount into fiscal year 22. And then we believe it's going to grow steadily thereafter before it plateaus out at somewhere between $20 and $25 million in our coffers each year. So the chart also shows the recommendation to transfer or reallocate the skill centers to which are primarily involved in economic development and STEM kind of activities, to move that $7.6 million of spending from the general fund to Proposition 207, which we believe makes sense, and that helps us fund the 4% cost of living adjustment for FY22. Next slide, please. Capital uses, you've seen this chart in January. There have been no changes, and it shows our projections for capital investments for fiscal year 22. And as I mentioned previously, our projections show an increase of $16 million in capital expenditures from this fiscal year, with $7 million of that increase dedicated for and toward our deferred maintenance program. And back in January, Mrs. Nguyen asked for a 5-year projection of deferred maintenance projects, and I have this in the next slide that we will get to in a minute. And then Mrs. McGrath also asked a question about the South Mountain College Canal water project and whether it derives from CAP water that is fully committed. The answer is no, it is not. South is not part of the Roosevelt Water Conservation District, and the water that is being drawn for this project is from the SRP Canal, to which South Mountain, as the property owner, has grandfathered water rights. So that will not be an issue with the CAP allocations. Next slide, please. And in answer to Mrs. Nguyen's question about our capital deferred maintenance program, because we've been able to bundle some campus projects together, we've gained experience. We're getting more efficient at remediation across several campuses. We've been able to save both money and also intensify work on campuses during the pandemic, since fewer staff and students have been on campus and in the way of our projects. But even this chart builds in a 3.5% cost escalator into the projects. But even with that escalator built in, we plan to stay within a budget target of between $25 million and $28 million annually over this 5-year period and into the future until we complete all the projects and then cycle back for those that now need remediation again. So to answer the question, the deferred maintenance program will not unduly burden the capital budget and will continue to allow for other investments such as remodeling and meeting safety codes. And additionally, we can expect the comprehensive facility study that is currently underway that I mentioned earlier will likely identify other investment needs as well, which we can add into our capital program. Next slide. Okay, this slide returns from January. You've seen it. It's our first slide showing the effects of continuing the secondary to primary tax rate shift and dedicate that difference to capital. The blue bars show capital fund resources through fiscal year 26, and the green bars show expenditures, and the turquoise bars show projected end balances. And this graph, again, is built on the assumption that the board will continue to implement the shift mechanism so that we have adequate resources for our capital programs. At this time, we have no other ongoing source of revenue to fund our capital needs. So what the graph, bottom line is, what the graph shows is that we can raise significant ongoing revenue to support our capital investment programs, and we can do so barring unforeseen circumstances without having to seek capital through new bond issues. And we believe that that is important. Next slide, please. This slide just, and you've seen this slide before back in January as well, it just shows the data, the underlying data that went into developing that graph that you saw on the previous slide. The amount raised by this tax shift grows incrementally, and it's significant. And at the same time that we're able to add these resources to address our capital needs, the combined total tax rate, secondary and primary, each year of the shift will be lower. So we're able to lower the total tax rate while also investing significant revenues in our capital program. The first row, the third row shows the annual revenue contribution. And you can see that it will reach by fiscal year 27-28, $75 million of ongoing revenue. And that it will remain that amount as we will have reached fully paying off our bonds at that point. But again, it's a significant level of revenue that we can use to meet our needs, capital needs into the future. I'd also direct your attention to the last row, and it shows the tax rate, again, the combined tax rate, primary and secondary tax rates decreasing in each and every year that we would propose the shift. Next slide, please. Okay, what I'd like to do with your indulgence, because this is a fairly complicated slide, but it really does show the effect of taxes with the tax shift on homeowners. And I'd like to just walk through this slide with you so that you've got a better understanding. I know there's a lot of numbers here and it looks fairly complicated, but let me go ahead and walk through. First thing I want to direct your attention to is that there are 3 horizontal blocks that are different colors that contain numbers. There's the top block, which is gray, the middle block, which is beige, and then the bottom block is lavender. And they run across the chart from left to the right. So what we want to show in this chart is the effect on a homeowner that would result from the proposed tax shift that we are proposing for fiscal year 22. So if I could direct your attention now to the middle columns that are under the light blue shaded area that's titled Home Values Constant. These 2 columns show the current annual tax bill dedicated to Maricopa for 2 typical homes. One with assessed valuation of $100,000, and then the second, a home with assessed valuation of $300,000 for tax purposes. The $100,000 home will pay Yes. Hello?
I am so sorry. When you started, hi, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but you
Sure.
totally cut out when you started this slide.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, and I heard some of what you said, but the majority of what you were saying, I couldn't hear.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Mrs. Wynn. I can start over. And what I started with is, it looks complicated, but let me explain. And first, let me direct you. I mean, there are 3 segments or 3 bands, 3 colored bands to this chart that run from left to right. The top band is gray, the middle band is beige, and the bottom band is lavender. The top band shows the current tax situation. The middle or beige band shows the tax situation for 2 typical homes with no shift. And then the bottom or lavender band is the block that shows the tax situation with the tax shift. The beige band is labeled scenario 1, again, no tax shift. And the lavender band is labeled scenario 2 with the tax shift. So first thing I want you to do is go back up to the top and look at the light blue shaded area that's labeled Home Values Constant. And what this shows is the taxes paid by 2 typical homeowners, one whose home is assessed at $100,000 for tax purposes. The second is assessed at $300,000, or triple the $100,000 home. And each of those homes will pay on an annual basis to the MCCCD share for the $100,000 home. The tax bill for our share is $128.81. For the $300,000 typical home, the amount is $386.43. And if you look directly to the left of those tax payment bills, if you will, the column directly to the left of that is the tax rates. And so you can see the rate per $100, again, staying in the gray band. The current primary tax rate that is assessed on behalf of Maricopa County Community College District is $1.1250. The secondary tax rate to pay off our debt service in FY21 is a little over 16 cents. So the combined tax rate that produces those tax bills per $100 of assessed valuation for FY21 is $1.28, almost 29 cents. Okay, I hope everybody's with me so far. So now let's drop down and let's go all the way down to the lavender block, which is scenario 2. And this is what happens with our tax shift. So what it shows is that if we make the shift of a portion of the reduction in the secondary tax, because the debt service schedule will require less tax revenue to fund in FY22, falls by almost 5 cents, from 16 cents to a little over 11 cents. So what we do with the tax shift is we take a portion of that reduction in the secondary rate and transfer it to the primary rate and dedicate that difference to capital. So again, looking at the lavender block under scenario 2, the tax amount for the $100,000 home would fall from $128.81 to $122.57. And the $300,000 home would fall in terms of its tax bill from $386.43 to $367.71. The secondary tax rate, again, moving to the left of the tax bill amount, looking at the tax rates per $100,000 with the tax shift, the primary tax rate would fall to $1.11 roughly, from $1.12.50. And again, the secondary tax rate is what the rate is to cover the debt service. But the combined tax due to the decline in the secondary tax would fall to $1.22 from the $1.28 that is currently applied to assessed valuation. So we all know that property values don't stay constant. And while there will be a reduction in the tax bill and the tax rate, we also have to account for the fact that the assessed valuation grows as well. So what happens is that if we assume that each of these two example typical homes increase in assessed valuation by the county average of 4.1% between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, we're now looking at the far right columns of the lavender block. The homeowner will still see a reduction in total taxes. For the $100,000 homeowner, that reduction in the tax bill in FY22 from the 21 bill, the savings would be $1.27. And for the $300,000 home, it will be $3.82. So, and now here's where it gets a little bit and I have to, I'm sorry, but this is important as well. And it does get a little bit complicated as a result of our tax laws. So if I can now direct you back to the middle band, the beige band of numbers. So, and this is labeled as scenario 1. Under the no tax shift, that is, we do not shift a portion of the reduction in the secondary tax rate, the entirety of that roughly 5-cent decrease in the secondary tax rate would have flowed through to the homeowner, and the reduction in total taxes would have been even lower. The primary tax rate would have been $1.08 rather than the $1.11. And because the primary tax rate under the shift, while it's still lower than the current rate, is nevertheless higher than the no shift primary rate. And therefore, the law requires us to do what's called a truth in taxation process, or TNT, as its shorthand is known by. And this would require us to publish the truth in taxation analysis in the newspaper. So I know that's a long explanation, but I know that this has been confusing in the past. And so we hope that with this chart and the explanations that we can impart, a better understanding of, number one, why we think the tax shift is a reasonable thing to do. In fact, it was suggested by ATRA as a way for the Arizona Tax Research Association, as a way to help us fund our capital needs, since we have no other ongoing revenue source. And as I mentioned earlier, by doing this, it's also a way for us to avoid having to issue bonds to fund our significant capital needs. So with that, Elsa, I think we're at the end. You can probably go to the last slide. And I think we all stand ready to answer questions. And I thank you very much for indulging in our presentation, which I know has been a lengthy one with lots of information. So with that, I'll turn it back to President Sullivan for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Yaquinto, Mr. Wilson, Ms. Grano, and Mr. Moore, Dr. Moore, for your presentation today. And thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, for bringing that to us. Board members, we are in a meeting, not a work session. However, we can conduct this the same way, in that I will go through a roll call, because we have found that over time to be easiest when we're in virtual meetings, and have you ask any questions which have come to mind over any part of this presentation. For discussion purposes, I'll do my best to identify if someone wants to speak, add a question on top of another. And with that, we do have potentially another 40 minutes for this discussion if we need that. So don't hesitate if you have a comment or a question to make that. I think I'm going to start with you, Ms. Nguyen. Do you have any comments or questions this evening on this presentation?
I do, and unfortunately, because I can't access the screen, I'm gonna have to ask them to go back. But they were talking about salaries, that we didn't do something for a period of time. I think it was 2010 to 2020 or 2021, and that we now need to do this here. Yes. I'm going to adjust it for inflation. Can we go back to the slide before this one? I'm looking for the number of employees. I think this was market aligned. I think There it is. Perfect. So the 4,752 full-time employees, those are not just, those are faculty and staff. Do we have the breakdown between faculty and staff? So how many staff and how many faculty?
So President Sullivan, Mrs. Nguyen, there's approximately 1,400 faculty, and so the balance would be the staff. I can get the exact numbers, but it's roughly 1,400 of those 4,752 are faculty.
And I think what I did is I took the number of faculty or number of people, and I divided it by the $326.3 million dollar amount. And so I came up with a rough annual salary. Now I realize some people make more, some people make less, of about $75,000 annually. Does that seem, I know that's not how this is. We have some people making less and some people making more, but is that about accurate?
Certainly the approach of taking that dollar amount and dividing it by the number of employees, that is a correct strategy. And I can do the calculation, but I'm assuming the calculation was done correctly there, that would be correct.
Okay. And so my question is, obviously, again, some more, some less, and the cost of living raise that would be across the board for every employee of the district, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so previous boards determined not to do that, and they apparently decided not to do it for whatever reason they decided. We are taking a very aggressive stand to do it. It seems like to almost correct it in a much shorter period. And let me be clear, I'm not against the cost of living increase. The other thing that is missing for me though is what current salaries are in the marketplace versus what we're paying, as opposed to this formula of cost of living. And hear me out, and then I'll ask my question. I'm sorry for this long explanation. Last year, a lot of colleges laid people off, and I don't believe we did that. I don't believe we had anyone not be paid last year. And whereas they didn't get a cost of living increase, they had a steady pay. And I don't know if we thought about offsetting that because we didn't lay anybody off, and so that's one question I'd like to address. The other thing is there a reason we have to be so aggressive as we try to bring us into the market? And then the last question I have is, what is our rate of turnover? If our pay is so off, we have a very low rate of turnover. So clearly, whatever we're doing, although we need to be careful of the cost of living increase, we have not, our rate of turnover is very low. So I want to try to see if there's a way, I know I just created a fruit salad. I want to see if there's a way to take each of those pieces and maybe not be so aggressive with the proposal that you offered. I'm not in disagreement with it. I'm just in disagreement with the time frame in which you presented it. Okay.
All right. Thank you. I made notes and I'll try to address, I believe there were 3 questions in there, so I'll try to address each of those, Mrs. Nguyen. So in the strategic compensation philosophy, or in the compensation philosophy presented to us and approved by the board back in October, was direction for us to align our salary systems with market trends. And so what we know now from the analysis that's been provided is that we are estimated to be between 7 and 10% behind market. And what that means is that our consultants have gone out, looked at other higher education institutions, also look at industry in our area, and assessed where our salaries are falling relative to the 50th percentile of the market. And so we are behind market by between 7 and 10%. So then the strategy is, well, then what do we do to become market aligned? How aggressive should we be? And we're projecting that we should target becoming market aligned over a 5-year period, which would put us at pace with the 50th percent of the market. Certainly there's flexibility in the amount of time as an organization we can become market aligned, but it seemed to us that in order to achieve the goals that are identified in the compensation philosophy to align with the market, that a 5-year time frame would be appropriate. But again, there's flexibility there in terms of how rapidly we become market aligned.
Can I ask a follow-up question based on that real quick? So
yes, ma'am.
In terms of, so if we're comparing ourselves to other, I'm going to assume other educational organizations, correct? Not just any job in the marketplace?
Absolutely. Yes, Mrs. Nguyen, absolutely. The analysis is done on a job by job level with benchmark jobs. So comparing like jobs to like jobs in higher education, but also where we compete with the local market, like for IT jobs, we're not just competing with higher education institutions, we're also competing with industry. So we look at both higher ed and industry for those jobs where that's where we're competing for talent.
And in other organizations, do we know if there's evaluation standards for those people to get that amount of money so that they, because my understanding is that we don't really do evaluation of someone once they're in their role. And is there an enrollment factor? So our enrollment is clearly down right now. I'm hoping, like Mr. Yaquinto said, that it'll go up and we're expecting a rebound. But in right now, this last year, our enrollment is down significantly. So would those factors also be part of compensation? If you know, it's your intake is less, so then do we still reward or stay on this projection if in fact our enrollment doesn't come back? Have those been considered in this model?
So thank you, Mrs. Nguyen. As I understand the question is, should our market alignment objective be tied to enrollment? Is that part of the question?
Yes, and also, do we evaluate? You know, people get raises because there's an evaluation standard and they're excelling, and we said we wanted to keep the best of the best, or we want to have the best faculty, or we want to have the best employees. So is there a way to evaluate? It seems like a lot of our employees have been there a very long time, and I'm not saying that they're not all wonderful, but what standard do we have? If you want to do these systematic increases, is there a way that we can ensure the taxpayer that the people that we have there are the best of the best? And we do that through some evaluation standards, and or we tie it somehow to the enrollment. You know, a successful business has people wanting their product. So in a business model, I'm just trying to be sensitive to the fact that we need to adjust these standards, but also be able to turn around to the community and say, and in order to get the highest level, we are going to make sure that we provide certain standards for the people that work for us, and that we are going to be at a certain level for enrollment.
Sure. So there's two parts there, Mrs. Nguyen, as I'm hearing you. So the one piece is related to enrollment, and the second piece is related to performance standards for the employees. So certainly there is an organizational interest that all employees be engaged in advancing the mission of the institution. And so our policy documents provide guidance in terms of that engagement. We're receiving recommendations from the Mercer Group related to our compensation policies and procedures related to ways we can incentivize and motivate that engagement. And so there's a variety of strategies that they'll be bringing forward in their formal recommendation related to this. So other institutions, some do a flat cost of living increase, but then an additional amount based on performance of an employee. So they'll do a performance-based sort of incentive. So those ideas are being explored, and Mercer is looking at different strategies. But certainly the interest in having engaged employees who actively contribute is a shared interest from faculty, staff, and of course, as you mentioned, from the board and our community, making sure our employees are engaged. As related to tying market alignment to enrollment, a challenge with that strategy is if you've got your employees that are highly engaged, they're doing those things that we want them to, but yet enrollment may be down. and so then because of inflation, they're losing buying power. It's hard to demonstrate that we're investing in our employees if we're tying their compensation to what happens in terms of enrollment. So certainly in terms of the big picture, in terms of revenue sources, enrollment absolutely plays a factor. And looking at revenue in terms of enrollment, part of that I think is an important part of on the revenue side. But I would recommend that we not seek to tie compensation to those fluctuations we're going to expect to see in terms of enrollment. I do want to go ahead.
Mr. Wilson, you can continue, and then I'm going to move us to the next board member after you finish your thought there. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sullivan. There was a request for turnover numbers, and Martha Anderson has the turnover numbers to report to us. Martha?
Yes, Mrs. Nguyen. Thank you, Frank. Mrs. Nguyen, President Sullivan, the turnover number for 2020 was 9.48%, and we're projected for 2021 a turnover rate of 7.63%.
Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. All right, I'm going to move and thank you, Ms. Nguyen, for your questions. Dr. Thor, your turn.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. I do have a number of questions, so I'd like to ask most of them, so maybe the answers could be on the briefer side. So I want to talk about the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds, HERF. So it's my understanding that the money goes directly to the colleges. That money does not come to the district that then allocates it out to the colleges. Since we have many services that are budgeted at a district-wide level, such as a lot of the technology services or some of the support services to students, are the colleges planning to reallocate some of their funds to these district-wide services?
Whomever that's most appropriate to answer, that could be Dr. Gonzalez, could be you, Mr. Quinto.
And I guess this one, I don't have information to address that question. And perhaps Jim Moore, Dr. Moore, or Dr. Gonzalez might. I just don't know that plans have been solidified for the spending by the colleges of all of the buckets that are related to HERF.
Dr. Moore, would you like to respond?
Yes, I know conversations, nothing has been cast. The conversations have, because it's one-time money, and there are, if the colleges would choose to participate jointly, in funding something that is of mutual benefit to all the colleges, that is a doable scenario. But I don't know that it's been laid out in terms of where to go with the remaining funds. There are some obvious things like case management software for students. There are things that would directly benefit students that if we were to do it as a collective, and the schools each paid for it based upon their student population or usage, it's something that I think HERF would allow. We just haven't advanced to that level yet.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on to the strategic compensation plan. And this has been a high priority for me in the entire time that I've been on the board. So I'd like to say bravo. I do want to put on my hat as the unofficial historian of Maricopa and point out to board members how setting our benchmark as 50 at the 50 percentile of the market is considerably less than where this district was historically. When I came on the board in 1990 and for the decades that followed that, it was board policy that we would be in the top quartile of the market. So frankly, this is just representative of how far we have fallen. I also want to point out that the plan is addressing where we are in the job market, that the percentage increase that's being recommended is to get us back to market. It is not about raises per se for our employees, because our employees have lost all of that buying power over time. And this doesn't have to be answered tonight, but I would appreciate knowing what board policy or resolution do you need to provide the certainty required to fully implement the compensation plan in future years? And like I said, I don't have to have an answer to that tonight. On slide 29, where there was a review of all of the revenue and the planned expenditures, it showed a fairly hefty decrease in the fund balance from this year to next year. Because HERF will, at least the more recent ones, the Carissa and the rescue plan, will allow us to recover revenue losses that we endured, such as the loss of tuition associated with enrollment. Won't some of those HERF funds fall to the bottom line and increase the uncommitted fund balance for FY22?
President Sullivan and Board Member Thor, the answer to that is yes, it well could and help support the general fund, even though these are one-time monies that are restricted, but to the extent that they can be used to replace lost revenues, then the accounting can be worked so that it could help the bottom line. It also point out to Dr. Thor that the rather precipitous drop in the end balance, part of that, in fact, a large part is attributable to setting aside that additional 6% into reserve. So, but the short answer to your question is yes, it could help.
Okay.
And President Sullivan, Dr. Thor, this is Georgetta Kelly.
Yes.
I want to respond to your other question in reference to the board policy. It would be board policy 2.7, staff compensation and benefits.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then the last, which is kind of like my third question that doesn't have to be answered tonight, but every year we talk about this tax shift. And when the board, a number of years ago, first implemented the tax shift, we did it so as to avoid having to do a general obligation bond in the future. Yet every year we talk about it as if there's a choice. Our choice is either do this or prepare for a general obligation bond. So what board policy or resolution do you need to provide the certainty required to continue the tax shift in order to support capital and not have to have a general obligation bond? And again, that doesn't have to be answered tonight, but I would like it to be answered at some point.
Yeah, we will do so.
Thank you.
I was on mute. Thank you, Dr. Thor. I'm going to move us now to Ms. Smith. Jacqueline, it's hard to
Hello,
hear
can you hear me?
breaking up. There you go. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate Dr. Thor speaking about district-wide funding. That was my funding opportunities and coordination among the colleges for the one-time funding use. And so I wanted Dr. Gonzalez to speak a bit to related to some other conversations that we've had recently around lessons learned from the pandemic in ways that we can improve operational efficiency as a district. And I was hoping he could comment as to how he thinks this budget approach leverages what we've learned about being a more operationally efficient district with coordination among the colleges. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mrs. Smith. You know, as we've said before, we've learned a tremendous amount through this pandemic, especially in our ability to be able to respond to emergency situations. We've learned that we're not, that early on that we weren't prepared to respond to the degree that we had hoped, and we've improved some of our policies and processes around that. As far as what you might see in this budget to address some of those efficiencies, I think the savings that you see throughout the year, because we've been absent mostly in working remotely, is reflected in this budget. Going back to Dr. Thor's question, if you're piggybacking on that one, it would be disappointing for us as a system if we didn't take advantage of the opportunity to take these dollars that have been allocated through these federal grants and somehow find a way to impact our system. And whether that's to improve some sort of a process, but our primary focus, at least my primary focus, if I were to assemble a group and charge them with this, would be to focusing on improving the student experience when they, at the moment that they are being recruited into Maricopa through the enrollment process, and then how can we improve their experience while they're with us? That would be a high priority for us as well. So we've had some of those conversations, as Dr. Moore indicated. We haven't made a lot of movement, partially because we continue to wait from the federal government to give us word on how we're allowed to spend these dollars. That seems to be a moving target. In fact, I learned some things tonight in Kim Granillo's presentation that I didn't know before, and I suspect that those were things that have been probably learned in the last few days. So we'll continue to do that. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that for the first CARES Act, 50% had to be spent on student grants. For Carissa, it was 25%, and for the American Recovery Act, I think it's back to 50%. So those aren't all dollars that are available for institutional funds. I hope I'm going to definitely think on your question some more, Mrs. Smith, and I hope to have a conversation soon on some other items that we will continue to work on, and always looking for feedback and recommendations from our board as well.
Thank you. I would just say, as we continue, I'd love to hear the ways in which funding will be used to improve the student experience and how that happens at the district level, and then how these kinds of improvements happen at the college level, and when they occur at the college level, how best practices are then disseminated to the other colleges. And I just want to underscore that I hope that one of the silver linings of the pandemic is really leveraging what it means to be such a robust district. We can really learn across this network of colleges. Those are my questions for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, if I may add to your question in terms of what we learned in terms of how we continue to operate, I think that our students are going to demand that the normal that we knew is not likely to occur again. Our students have become accustomed to, receiving services remotely. They've learned to receive tutoring remotely, advising remotely. They've learned to interact with financial aid officers remotely. And I think that there's going to be a group of students that can't wait to get back on campus and have that face-to-face experience. But I also think that there's going to be a large group of students that will want to continue to operate in that remote environment. And we need to ensure that our system moving forward has a good offering of both the face-to-face experience, both in learning and support, and a virtual experience in both learning and support to our students.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, and thank you, Ms. Smith, for your question. Dr. Narini.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. There was lots of information, and I really appreciate the incorporation of the compensation philosophy and where we're going with that. The COLA and all those sort of things to help bring our staff and faculty back to market levels. And I know that we can't set any sort of policy to give individuals raises for what they do in addition to just bringing them back up to market value in the COLA. But is there a way that we can incorporate some sort of professional development or leadership development so that those individuals who do want to improve, who do want to advance, so that not just advance for their pay, but to advance for their own personal growth, to help compensate them and help them achieve some of their goals, and again, and their goals being making a better college and making a better place for our students to learn. So I don't know if that's a question or just a comment, but I would like to, as part of our compensation philosophy and goals, to make sure that our staff and faculty have opportunities to move ahead and move forward with their goals as well as the goals of the institution.
President Sullivan and Dr. Narini, I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of our key focus areas in terms of the strategic compensation plan is the ongoing professional development of our employees, both faculty and staff. We currently have a program in place that's used every year in terms of faculty professional growth, by which they can engage in increasing their expertise through learning, and then demonstrate how that learning has increased their effectiveness and their ability to contribute to the organization. And we acknowledge that learning with a modest salary adjustment for those who engage in those professional growth activities and increase their value to the organization through their increased knowledge. Our compensation advisory committee is also working on the staff side in terms of developing a similar program for our staff to allow them to demonstrate their growth and how it benefits the organization, and then reward that growth as well in terms of salary. So those are some areas where we are very much focused on growing our employees and helping them be able to contribute even more substantially to our organization. Additionally, we are working on career paths and organic promotions for these employees as they engage and contribute significantly, make it easier for them to navigate through our system, which has been challenging for many employees. Thank you.
Well, yeah,
thank you.
I do appreciate that, because our turnover rate may be low, but that doesn't always equate to high morale either. Sometimes people are there because they stay because they have to stay. So if we can give them incentives to and help them make their own improvements, I think that it helps for the morale and the lower the turnover rate. So thank you for doing that.
Okay, moving on then, if you're concluded your questions, Dr. Narini, I'm moving to Mrs. McGrath.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted and you sound well.
Thank you. I am well.
Good.
I'm a little bit disappointed that we did not continue on with the reduction of 3% of the money. I don't like the idea of spending everything that we can get our hands on. And I'm very disappointed that we do not have anything in here for training employees to make the registration process work. I've been dealing with an employee who's trying to register a veteran, and the incompetence that he tells me that he encounters in getting his money for, I assume from the government through the school, is just ridiculous. And we have this low turnover rate, and I think we have a low turnover rate because we don't pay attention to the poor employees that we have. We don't either we're not training them or we're not firing them. And I'm getting very frustrated that we just drift along with this low turnover rate, which sounds wonderful, but it tells me we aren't getting rid of any of the dead weight here. I'm also interested in the chancellor pointed out that he was going to change the sixth floor, so to speak, the higher administrators. And I see that there's a money on page 24 for a new job level for administrative support job series. And I don't know if that means for his changing of the way we operate or not, but I would really like to know more about that before we approve of it. And is there any reason we're not continuing on with the 3% reduction?
Dr. Gonzalez, I think maybe you could answer both those questions.
Well, yes, I think the question about the administrative support, that isn't in reference to administrative support on a particular floor in the district office building. That's in reference to administrative support across a number of positions across our district that support administrative positions such as assistant deans, associate deans, deans, vice presidents, and college presidents around our district. The second question about why not 3% and 1%, as we stated at the very beginning, and it was said several times throughout the presentation, we didn't know that we were going to receive a second round of funding from the federal government, nor a third round. And these dollars are being used to bridge the gap over the next 2 years so that we didn't have to go through the 3% that we first presented. And we come to you with a 1% reduction instead.
Do you have any way to improve the work habits of our people, especially in the enrollment sector?
I'm sorry, Mrs. McGrath, could you please repeat the first part of your question?
Our enrollment process is very poor. We get complaints about it all the time. Are you doing anything to improve that with some of this money that you apparently have to take and spend?
Well, that's part of the plan, Mrs. McGrath, and that was part of my response to Mrs. Board Member Smith as well, and that if we can capitalize on systemic use of these dollars, I think that would be a really good thing for us, and especially for our students to improve that experience that you discussed. I need to sit down with our student affairs folks. I also need to sit down with our IT folks, and I need to ask this tough question. Are we driving a jalopy that we just continue to try to fix and make better, or is it time to trade this vehicle in and get something that is up to date and that, can deliver what we promise in students in terms of the experience in registering, getting admitted, and selecting courses across our system? So I agree, there's certainly room for improvement there.
I am so frustrated with the enrollment process. There must be some school somewhere in this country that has figured it out how to do enrollment in a much better fashion than we are. And I'd really appreciate it if you would do a search to find out where enrollment works, because ours is fraught with difficulties. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Mrs. McGrath.
Thank you. If you have no further questions, Mrs. McGrath, I'm going to go to Ms. Bittersmith.
Thank you, President Sullivan. I have a couple of questions, and maybe playing off of what Mrs. McGrath just asked, which I think is sort of heading into a generic question about technology needs and capital investment in new technology, which could even relate to a little bit of what Ms. Smith was asking about. Gary, in the capital use budget or the unencumbered fund balance budget, is there anticipated expenditures that may be needed to update obviously computer technology as a result of activities from a few weeks ago, and perhaps some of the issues that Mrs. McGrath touched on? I can see very specific allocations for building maintenance and roofing, et cetera, but I don't see anything, unless I've missed it on the slides, that is specific to improving our technology access. Is that built into this proposal?
And President Sullivan, Ms. Bittersmith, the answer is yes. It's built into our existing budgets. we haven't added significantly additional resources or dedicated additional resources to that, although there are some. But we, for example, the outage that occurred, we have upgraded several of our cybersecurity measures, and those costs are currently being funded out of our current budgets. And what's possible also is that some of that may ultimately attach to the insurance claims that we would make. And then finally, in addition, the federal monies that we have been discussing and provide significant amounts of resources that we can use to dedicate to technology that improves our position vis-a-vis what happened in the pandemic. So there are resources. We don't have identified a large investment this year in new technology, but there certainly is some that will be expended on technology, and we have existing budget and some existing capacity to be able to continue those investments.
Thank you. And Gary, that's what I was headed to. As you well know, there's our very specific dollars and a lot of that federal money targeted theoretically for connectivity as well as for technology upgrades. And it sounds like that as we begin to get more details and meat in the bones in those proposals, that's where you'd anticipate some of these dollars coming from. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. And in fact, from the CARES money, we've already been investing in technology in that fashion as part of our institutional portion of the grants.
Thank you. I have one other question. You referenced, as we talked about the tax shift conversation, that the end result proposal is something that actually ATRA suggested. I'm just curious, did we ask ATRA for a suggestion, or was this volunteered to us from ATRA?
And thank you for that question, President Sullivan, Ms. Bittersmith. That evolved prior to my time here at Maricopa. Mr. Hibbs was involved in establishing that mechanism together with ATRA. And my understanding from Mr. Hibbs, who at one time served as the chair when he was in a different position and role in state government, to ATRA, I believe he worked that mechanism out with ATRA. And it was ATRA that insisted that this was a better mechanism than having to increase our secondary tax if we were to go out and get approval for a GO bond issue.
And I don't disagree with their conclusion. I was just curious how that conversation started. That's helpful. Thank you. That's all I have, Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Ms. Bittersmith. So for me, I'll offer a couple questions. I'm not sure that they end up being questions, but comments. I do appreciate the discussion about the bigger picture of how the federal money will be distributed and how we can allocate resources to the district to ensure that we're addressing key issues in our system throughout the district. Certainly IT comes to mind as one, particularly given our more recent experiences. And so I appreciate the work and the questions that have surrounded that. The other question that came to mind as we were hearing more about the compensation planning, given that we as a board did support the compensation philosophy, is very similar to Dr. Thor's question. And that is, what mechanism can we use, for example, to ensure that a board that approves a plan has an opportunity to see that plan carried out, certainly with fluctuation annually due to circumstances. I mean, God forbid we ever have another pandemic after we tend to recover from this. But it seems to me that long-range planning, strategic planning, visioning involves multiple years. And we did have a vision and a strategic interest in seeing our compensation package improve. So as you reflect on the questions from Dr. Thor, know that those are also mine, and I would appreciate how you choose to evaluate that and provide us with answers so we as a board can have a better understanding of what our next step is outside of just approving a one-year budget. Certainly there's always the one-year approval of the dollars, but in enforcing the philosophy similarly to what we're doing in the property tax shift. And I also see an opportunity, Dr. Gonzalez, for you to really be engaging in some of this long-range interest that we all have around the strategies for student success, the enrollment practices, the opportunity to do some fiduciary investments in those practices. Again, I come back to IT. How do we work as a district system? And then how do we perpetuate an interest and a philosophy into our planning? So I guess I'm making more comments than questions, but I do want to support the previous questions and inquiries from the other board members. I appreciate their interest and foresight and their astuteness in how they are working through these presentations and sessions. So with that, Dr. Gonzalez and Mr. Quinto, unless another board member has another comment, we have a few minutes. I will move us forward, but so last call, board members, do you have any further questions that will support this, Dr. Moore and his team, to develop a budget for us to see as a first read at the next meeting?
I have a question.
Thank you, Mrs. McGrath. Yes.
I wasn't referring to the physical 6th floor when I asked about the administration. Dr. Gonzalez said that he had a plan to change how his administration works, with various titles being changed and people added on. And I would really like to see a complete explanation of that and how much it will cost and how much each person would receive in salary with apparently a promotion. Thank you.
President Sullivan.
Yes, Dr. Gonzalez. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to need some clarification on that request. I'm not understanding or recalling the plan that Mrs. McGrath is referring to. So I'll follow up with her offline to get a little bit more detail on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And it may be line items as opposed to a category. So it would be good for you and Mrs. McGrath to connect, and we'll see where that falls into the next budget reading, or if it's implied in some respects. So thank you, Mrs. McGrath. I think you'll get your answer then.
Yes.
Okay. Board members, is there any last comment or question from any of you?
I have one really quick question, I promise.
Okay, go ahead. Yes. Go ahead,
if there's any, as we digest all this information, and by the way, thank you for really addressing a lot of concerns that we brought up earlier. I'm super impressed. Who should we email to? So do you want one point of contact? So if we come up with questions, how, as we review this, because I want to review everything we've gone over tonight with your explanation and formulate, if I have any more questions, what's the procedure as you go forward in the next process? What should we as board members do if we have more concerns or questions?
I'll answer that. I think, Mrs. Wynn, if you could direct your questions to Mrs. Macias, and then she would ensure that it gets to Dr. Moore and his team for appropriate responses, which will then come to all of us as board members.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Does that work for you, Dr. Moore? And you,
yes,
Mrs.
yep.
Macias? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Sure, and certainly Dr. Gonzalez, you'll be included in all of that as well.
Yes. Yep.
Good. Any other comments, board members, or any other comments from you, Dr. Gonzalez and Dr. Moore and your teams?
I would just like to conclude with, again, expressing our appreciation for going through this process with us and for the additional questions and feedback. I think it just continues to make this a better budget that ultimately drive the work that we do. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your time this evening. And I want to also extend my gratitude to the team that has spent many, many hours developing this presentation tonight.
Agreed. I think it has been important that we started early this year as so many situations and concerns appeared. And as we've moved along, we seem to gather more information, and this will help us be ready for the first read. So I would like to remind everyone that we will have on April 20th at 4:30 the agenda review, and I believe that's when it was noted we will see the first modeling of the budget. Then on April 27, 2021 at 6:30, we will convene the regular board meeting at which the first reading of the budget will be present. So with that, I would say thank you to all of you who are present, who are not board members, though I thank you to board members, and adjourn you all. And I am going to ask, is there a motion to adjourn to executive session pursuant to 38-431.03 (A)(1) discussion or consideration of employment of interim chancellor evaluation, and two other items. Do I have a motion to move forward?
So moved.
And the move was made by whom?
Dr. Thor.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved by Dr. Thor, seconded by Dr. Narini. There are also two other components as we continue our discussion under 38-431.03 (A)(3), discussion or consultation for legal advice with the attorneys of the board, interim chancellor contract, and 38-431.03 (A)(4), discussion or consultation with the attorneys of the public body in order to consider its position and instruct its attorneys regarding the public body's position regarding contracts that are the subject of negotiations, also tied to the interim chancellor contract. So with that, I'm going to call roll for the vote on the motion. Ms. Bittersmith?
Aye.
Thank you. Mrs. McGrath?
Aye.
Dr. Narini?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Dr. Thor?
Aye.
Mrs. Nguyen? Mrs. Nguyen? Did we lose her, Elsa, or is she on line still?
We're looking right now.
Okay.
I believe she may be headed to the executive session already.
Okay, thank you. I vote aye. So with that, there's a motion of 6, 0 of the board members present. So we will convene into the executive session. And with that, board members, we will exit from this meeting and connect in our other manner so that we can convene their ways. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance at tonight's special public meeting. With that, board members, I'll see you in a couple minutes. Thank you.